Thank you. So everybody, as usual, welcome to Leading Greater Essex Plus Unplugged. Today, I am joined by Viv Barnes, my personal facilitator that many of you may have seen supporting me over the past 6.5 years. And Viv's second day working for me was actually the celebration event of the pilot programme for LGE, which was called Greater Essex Leadership Collaborative. So that was a bit of a baptism of fire, and it seems fitting now that it's penultimate day for Viv with me is an LGE Plus Unplugged, which is Fawn, who's going to Waves, second day. And there is actually an overlap. Fawn is taking over as my personal facilitator. So from now on, if you get an email from Fawn Roberts, she is probably doing something I'm asking her to do to help run LGE Plus. So welcome also to Andrew Lennox. Andrew is the new, or relatively new now, you've been with us a few months, Chief Exec of Guide Dogs UK. And as you might see, to make Andrew feel comfortable, I'm wearing my Guide Dogs hoodie, not my usual sort of daytime corporate attire, but in my non-ECC life and in my non-LGE life, I am a trustee of Guide Dogs UK, and we were very pleased last year to recruit a new chief exec who is here to talk to us about his experience of transitioning within and between organisations and observing what organisations feel like when either they or their members are going through times of change. So I will disappear and shut up. Andrew has got a few things to say to us, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So if we can hold off on the chat and the questions until towards the end of Andrew's piece, please. And then we'll give you some time to fire Andrew with questions. We are recording this and we'll be sharing it on YouTube in our Teams page and LinkedIn page thereafter, so that other LG Plus colleagues get the opportunity to join in. And just another little plug that the next one will be at the end of March at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. So it's an early breakfast one, and hope that'll work for people as well, but that will also be recorded. So over to Andrew. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you all for inviting me along this evening to talk to you. I believe your next speaker is actually Lord of the Realm, so if I recall from what I've seen, so hopefully I will be a good warm-up act for that event in a few weeks' time. So as Kate intimated, I've been with Guide Dogs a little over 6 months now, and I spent the first 6 weeks, I had a fantastic 2-month overlap with my predecessor, Tom. So I spent 6 weeks running around the organisation without any responsibilities, and I spent the subsequent 5 months running around the organisation being irresponsible, which is an incredible organisation to be part of. But what I thought I'd do this evening is to start off really by giving you a little bit of a background to myself, so you understand where I've come from, the journey I've been on to get to where I am, and then getting into a little bit more around the cultural experiences I've had between the private equity world, which I came from, and also the commercial world before that, and then more recently the cultural experience of me immersing myself within a charity within UK PLC. I understand from the briefing I've had that some of you are within charitable organisations, some of you within local authorities, and some are within sort of not-for-profit organisations as well. So hopefully there'll be a few points that will chime with you all. So I'm going to really take you back to how did this all begin for myself. So I actually started off as an engineer by training, as it were. I went to Humberside University and moved across to Hull University. And at the end of my second year, I got the opportunity to go and do a 2-week work placement with Smith & Nephew. So many of you will have... Oh, there's a feedback coming through on the line, so if you can just make sure you're muted, that'd be wonderful. I went to work for Smith & Nephew. Many of you will know the brands of Elastoplast or Nivea that Smith & Nephew make. But I was actually involved in the design of a new manufacturing facility for them. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I was offered a year out. And at the end of the year out, they offered me a permanent job, which I took. And my first job was actually working on the lines, manufacturing lines, looking at how we could improve processes. And one of the things I realised quite early on is actually, no matter what engineering knowledge I had, the people closest to the problem, the people who actually operated the machines, had probably a better working knowledge of what was going wrong with those machines and how they would change than myself with my engineer brain would have. So I guess my first lesson I had in the real world is the people who are closest to the problem will have the best idea of how to fix them. And that's something that sort of stuck in my brain as I was going along. I then was asked, I decided I wasn't much of an engineer because I actually really liked the people piece of it. So I got myself transferred into the logistics team, and I worked in production planning, where I was coordinating everything from marketing to customer services to uh, international demand management and all sorts of other things, as well as the manufacturing piece. And I found I had a bit of a passion for change management. We were going through a fair amount of change at Smith & Nephew at the time, putting in a new ERP system. And I found actually that the ways of working piece and that the idea of organizational change and understanding how to help people through change, I found fascinating. The psychology of watching people resist or accept or embrace change, I found really, really fascinating, and wanted to help people to transition. And then moving on from there, I decided that actually I wanted to continue that change journey and went off. But one of the insights I had just before I left Hull, as I was driving down the road one day, I was helping out at a homeless shelter over in East Hull for ex-prison offenders and drug addicts, alcohol addicts as well. And I was on my way over there. I remember driving past a blue plumber's van. I can still see it now. As I crossed over the bridge from West Hull to East Hull, as I crossed over the bridge, I saw this blue van and I saw the plumber there, and I just thought, he's going to help probably 8 people today. Over his entire career, he's going to help thousands of people, but he'll be helping them one at a time. I want to take on a career that's going to help me to help influence and support thousands of people. I want to have the biggest impact I possibly can. It was one of those moments that I had in my life where it was a defining moment for me. So when I went back to work the following week, I thought, how can I have the best influence, the biggest positive influence on people just from having seen that plumber's wagon? I thought, he's going to change lots of people's lives, but I want to make as much of my life as I can. So when I went back, I started looking at change management projects in and around. I ended up going to GlaxoSmithKline to do a huge change management project for them, 6 sites, global project change. I then went to Motorola in 2000, and again, it was a huge multi-site, multi-country organizational change piece we were going through. And I thought I was going there to do again a rollout of an Oracle-based system. But when I got there, the 3G bubble burst in 2000. And I found myself actually at the opposite end of change, where we had to downsize the organization from 40,000 people to 18,000 people in the period of about 6 months. So that taught me about change from a very negative perspective. That experience of people's livelihoods were going to be going out the window. And I was going to be in that position of trying to manage that change for a large number of them within my own organization. I found that really quite exciting, but I also had another insight while I was there. So all my career up to that point had been within healthcare or pharmaceuticals, so essentially healthcare again. Going to Motorola, if someone didn't get their mobile phone on time, I was professionally offended, but I didn't really personally care that much. I suddenly realized that actually the impact on an individual was more important to me than a widget, a thing. So when I got to the end of that change management project in Motorola and managed to reduce my own department down to the point where they didn't need me either, I found myself looking for healthcare jobs to again find a way that I can influence in a positive way as many people as I could. And I found myself at a company called Stryker, a huge multinational global healthcare corporation doing replacement hips and knees. If any of you have got a replacement hip, there's a 1 in 3 chance that you've got a Stryker hip inside you. I spent a lot of time with that organisation, about 8 years. And I found myself in charge of a team that was going into hospitals to design advanced operating theatres. And again, we were sat with clinicians and the team there. We spent the time trying to understand what their problem was, going back to that principle I spoke about earlier, about understanding the people who are closest to the problem have probably got the best idea of how to solve that problem, as opposed to someone sat in an ivory tower in a purchasing department. And so whilst we were commissioned to go and buy this, produce this kit, actually the design of it always came from those closest to the problem. So after doing that for a number of years, I branched out and I found myself running a hospital for Nuffield Health, which was great fun, down in Haverteeth, working very closely with the NHS, transitioning my hospital from being almost 100% private to being 30% NHS support. And again, finding a very valuable lesson when I'm leading a large team personally, was I would charge off down a direction and I would wonder why everyone else is still at the bus stop and I'm driving off down the road metaphorically in my bus, wondering why everyone's not coming with me. And then understanding actually the why is as important as the what when you're dealing with teams. Helping them to understand the what, helping them to understand the why will then help them to actually deliver the what it is that you're trying to change. So I learned some very direct management lessons from my matron. I have a couple of questions I always ask in my one-to-ones with teams. Number one is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing today? So 1 being absolutely terrible, I'm on my chin strap, and 10 being, I can dance down the corridors, I love working here. I know most of the people in Essex probably are bouncing down the corridors, pleased to be working for the local authority. So, but that's question number one that I ask at the beginning of the interview. And at the end of the interview, the question I always ask is there anything I'm doing that's annoying you or preventing you doing what you need to do? And my matron in that hospital, the first time I asked her that question, she said, am I really allowed to tell you? So of course you are. That's why I, as a leader, am asking the question. She said, I'll go away and think about it. And she came back with a list. So that was a moment for me as a new leader of the hospital. So we got through the list, and she realised I was actually, as a leader, that I was willing to embrace personal change to better support the team, and the behaviours that I was exhibiting as a personal leader that was stopping the team achieving the very best that they could be was not helpful to the organisation. So that was another lesson for me about actually be careful what you wish for, because you might just hear the truth. And actually, sometimes the truth is one of the most powerful things we can hear. More on that in a moment. So then moving on from there, I decided to branch out into social care. So I've been in healthcare all my career, and I found myself then entering private equity land. And I found myself running a health and social care organisation, specifically looking after people with learning disabilities and mental health, providing supported living to about 800 people across the country, ranging from Cumbria in the northwest down to Exeter in the southwest, up through the country, up through Birmingham, and up into the northeast. The only area we didn't play was the southeast of the country. So that brought me into the local authority, in contact with local authorities as well as with the NHS, as providing the provision of care was split between healthcare budgets and budgets within local authorities. And that's where I kind of learned some of the harsh realities of life in an organisation that actually has to make money in order to be able to survive, and the very tight margins that you're working on. And for those of you who are within social care environments will know how tight the budgets are and the increasing demand you have all the time. I remember having a moment in my first year there where I've always worked in corporates and no one ever thought about the money and where the money comes from. Where in my first few months there as the chief exec of Eden Futures, I found myself looking at £14,000 left in the bank account and a payroll of £600,000, 12 days before Christmas, the worst 12 days of Christmas I think I've ever had, and trying to find a way to make sure we got the payroll out and getting the money in from all the local authorities where the bills hadn't been paid for a while. And actually realising that the money has got to come from somewhere. And I think we're all facing those headwinds, whether we be in local authorities, not-for-profits or commercial organisations. Those headwinds are now really beginning to bite. That cash is becoming more of a king within our worlds, where traditionally we might have thought of ourselves as exempt from having to worry about those things because we were quasi-government organisations or large corporates with bankrolls that go on for miles. So actually coming into that space and suddenly realising that cash is king, even for an area that's dealing with social care that you would think would be fairly impervious to it, was a real moment for me. And then I found myself staying within private equity, went to run a diagnostics company immediately before COVID hit. And we all know the fun that we had during COVID, but I was quite fortunate that I was within an industry that was desperately needed to provide support to the community whilst our hospitals were tied up with all sorts of other bits and pieces. So that was a very interesting point. But one of the things I tried to do was to try and get into the NHS, because I just wanted to make one little bit of it work, because I could see how hard it was to actually get things to operate efficiently. And I just wanted to try and see if I could change one part of the NHS. And I couldn't get in, no matter what I tried. So I actually sort of harbored a notion that maybe I'll go into politics and try and change it from without. But luckily I was saved at the 11th hour before I made that decision. And I got a phone call asking me whether or not I'd be willing to be the chief executive of Guide Dogs, because a couple of headhunters knew I was looking for a new role. As I was the diagnostics industry was interesting, but it wasn't going to. I turned my company around, and I was now looking for a new challenge. And I found myself with that chance to run Guide Dogs, and it was a real moment for me. I was originally shortlisted But then I was told, actually, you're not going to be considered. We're going to look at the charity people. But thanks for your time anyway. And at that moment, I was completely gutted. I hadn't realised how much emotionally invested I was in the idea of guide dogs and the idea of being able to be divorced from that need to make money, to actually be able to take on a role where I could actually do what was right for the people I'm trying to serve and not do what was right for a corporate environment. And so then when a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call from the recruiter saying, "Hi, Andrew, how are you? How's everything in your world?" Obviously trying to butter me up. And I was like, I already know what the question is and I'm in. And sure enough, I found myself, after 16 hours of interviews later, I was the least worst candidate, and Kate reluctantly agreed to my appointment as chief executive. So for that, I'm immensely grateful for her. So that really kind of takes you on the journey, and I'm going to give you a few pointers along the way about some of the lessons that I learned around the people being closest to the problem, being the ones that are the ones that you're going to need. The idea that personal leadership sometimes takes some reflection, that you need to sometimes confront the truth. Now, there's a great book that I was introduced to in 2001, 2002, called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And it's a very old kind of textbook now. It's what, 21, 22 years old. But there's a great chapter in it called Confront Brutal Truth. And so many organizations, this is an area that they find difficult to do. And actually looking the truth in the face and saying, actually, we need to deal with what's in front of us. And making a happy noise for hope, as I call it, isn't actually a management strategy or a leadership strategy. You sometimes have to deal with what's in front of you. And that's what I'm kind of going to go on to very shortly as we're looking at the cultural differences and the changes I've gone through. So I'm just going to bring up on the screen, I've got a presentation that I will also be talking through the slides. So those of you who need that sort of audio input can also have that. Hopefully it's coming up on the screen in front of you. I'm trying to just put it up onto full screen view.
Yeah,
is
it's
that
up
good?
there.
Perfect. Okay. So LGE Plus Unplugged, February 2024. Myself, Andrew Lennox, the chief exec. You've heard my life story, or the bits that I'm willing to publish, and so let's move on. So the bits I just wanted to talk you through. So on my agenda is a journey which I've just talked you through. Scope and scale of the organisation of guide dogs, so you can understand what it is that we do and how big we are, and so it gives you some context. Onto some sector challenges, some cultural differences, future thoughts, and then some Q&A for yourselves. And I will try and stick to time on the rest of it. So quickly, just looking at guide dogs, a few bits of background for you. Every 6 minutes, someone loses their sight in the UK. And by 2050, they expect that the number of people with a sight loss will double. At the moment, we have 250 people join the sight loss journey start their sight loss journey every day. That's where the one every 6 minutes comes from. And we also have the issue that we have about 3 million people in the UK with a vision impairment, of which only about 350,000 are actually registered. Guide dogs themselves, and we have a £140 million income, which is almost exclusively, 99% of it comes from charitable giving from our wonderful public donors. We have 1,900 employees. And this was the bit that was a bit interesting for me. It was 17,000 volunteers. So without 17,000 volunteers, I can't raise the £140 million income. And I also can't look after all the dogs that I've got. So one of the things you think about, we breed 1,300 puppies every year in order to provide the iconic guide dogs that we're so famous for. And each year, when we're going at full speed, we produce between 700 and 800 partnerships a year. But you need 1,300 puppies a year to be able to get 700 or 800 guide dogs out, just because some dogs aren't suitable. You also need to have some dogs to go into the breeding program. But those 1,300 puppies need somewhere to grow for the first 18 months of their lives. So of those 17,000 volunteers, at least 1,300 of them are looking after puppies at any point in time. I have another 900 dogs in training at any point in time. And again, they need foster homes for the 31 weeks that they're in training. I've got 1,200 retired guide dogs. Not all of them stay with their owners, and they need homes to live in as well. So I've got another about 800 volunteers that look after retired guide dogs. And then on top of that, I have to have kind of respite homes when people go on holiday. So of my 17,000 volunteers, I've got about 6,000 of them that I just need to look after my puppies and my dogs whilst we're doing our day-to-day business. So then I've got another 12,000 volunteers doing all sorts of jobs, from raising money to speaking to organisations to teaching people how to do sighted guiding. And we, as I say, on the screen there it says 31 weeks to train a dog with about a 60% pass rate. So 1,300 dogs in, I get about 700 or 800 partnerships out. Each partnership lasts about 7 years. So at any point in time, I've got about between 3,500 and 5,000 active partnerships. We've dropped down post-COVID because we couldn't train during COVID. So we're just building ourselves back up to 5,000 partnerships. But then we also do a whole bunch of other stuff. We don't just have the iconic guide dogs. We also have sighted guiding services. We have life skill services with vision rehabilitation specialists, information and advice lines. Our guideline service, which is a telephone service, deals with 1.8 million phone calls every year from people with a visual impairment needing support and help. So that's a huge piece of work we do. For children and families, we have, again, information and advice, life skills, My Time to Play, which is a specialist kind of community group in each area that provides playtime for kids to learn sensory pieces, supported by our staff, but also enables us to talk to parents and help them realise that actually a child being diagnosed with blindness doesn't mean that things stop. Actually, that's the point in time that they really need to just embrace the fact that their child's life is still going to be incredible and the future is looking brilliant. But it's actually a lot of the time the parents that are putting barriers in front of the child as opposed to the child worrying about it. Customised books is where we print books to any size font or in braille, and we only charge the child or the parents the cost of the book as if they bought it from Waterstones. So if you're looking for a Harry Potter in braille, please make sure you've got about 12-foot of bookcase because it comes out rather large. And we do a tech for all piece with Apple where we provide iPads and all sorts. So there's quite a range of services that we produce for that £140 million income. So whilst we may only have between 3,500 and 5,000 active guide dogs, each year we're helping tens of thousands of people with their sight loss journey. And it's quite an exciting range of things that we do. The sector challenges we face, and we move on to that. The big one is the fundraising headwinds that we have. The donor pound is proving to be harder and harder to get. Our own fundraising has flatlined over the last 3 years at about £140 million, as it says on the slide before. And we're having to find new and innovative ways to actually secure funding from our public. So one of the big areas that we have income from is legacies. But actually, the legacy market is becoming quite saturated as people realise this is a good long-term bet for their donor pound that they can give after they pass. But actually, that's becoming harder and harder as more people are playing in this space. So we're having to work hard to find new things. We're finding every other charity is getting the same issue, that our space, while we are non-competitive in terms of the services we provide, the competition that we are facing in order to gain that donor pound is getting harder and harder. We're all competing for that same limited money, especially within the cost of living crisis. Our staff retention, whilst is very good, our turnover rate is only about 8%. We also have the issue that our workforce has changed from a predominantly male workforce in the late 90s to being a female-dominated workforce, about, I think, 78% female workforce today. And that comes with its challenges that actually in your technical team, those who are training guide dogs and those who are the guide dog mobility specialists who are training the guide dog owners as how to use that amazing dog, they're all going to just very often have families, which is an absolutely wonderful thing. But then when they come back, the flexibility of the role is very important to them. And if we can't provide flexibility in all our roles, we're finding that the staff retention amongst that group is becoming harder without that flexibility. And when we were training a guide dog, you need to be there 5 days a week. So we're having to find and continually innovate new ways to actually train our guide dogs so that we can give that flexibility to our workforce as it is evolving in the modern world. I once sat through a motivational speech by Chris Akabusi. So some of you on the school are probably too young to remember Chris, but he was a hurdler back in the, I want to say the 80s and 90s. And he originally started off as a 400-meter runner. And then one day he came across this guy called Roger Black, who was faster than him. And so he suddenly realised that he wasn't going to win medals in 400 metres with Roger Black on the blocks next to him. So he moved to a different discipline, and he found another person coming in then who was faster and better than him. So he had to change again. And the phrase he used is, you need to evolve or you will die. And that stuck with me. And when I look at our staff retention and the way that we do things, if we keep doing things we did back in the noughties or in the teens, we're going to lose staff because the world has moved on and continually evolves. If we do not evolve with it, we ourselves will die because we won't be able to retain the best talent there is out there. A lot of ways of working changes post-pandemic. So how many of you are working from home today? I suspect quite a few. But actually that impacts us as a guide dog organisation because we rely on foster carers to look after our dogs at night and at weekends, but bring them into training during the day, kind of dropping them off almost like you would with a child at play school. You drop them off in the morning and pick them up in the evening. But actually, post-pandemic, people aren't working in the office, so they're not coming into the centre of town every day to drop the dog off. So we're having to radically change our target operating model as to how we do business. And as you look at your own organisations, you've got to start thinking about, actually, how is the world changing? And am I changing with it, or am I keeping my feet rooted in the past and not adapting with how it will change? Now, lots of people are saying, well, people are starting to come back to the offices now. That they are in some places, but I think in a lot of ways, our ways of working have forever changed. The flexibility of work, people's priority has moved from being work-centred to actually being looking more at their own work-life balance and their own well-being. And that changing focus on well-being that we've seen post-pandemic will change what we can expect of our employees, and we need to adapt or we will die within this space. Political will for change is an interesting one. I'm sure we've had lots of interesting discussions around this one, and I'm not sure I don't think we're in purdah or anything at the moment, so I think we're fairly safe. Don't think anyone's announced an election today, so we should be okay. But actually what we're seeing in both sides of the divide within Parliament, no one wants to commit to any political appetite for change or commitment within a specific area because they don't know how much money there will be, so therefore they're sitting very much on the fence until they decide what the future will look like. So actually, when we're trying to get meaningful change within the world, our ability to influence it is actually stymied by the political will we are seeing out in Parliament, which makes it very difficult for us to plan for the future when there's lots of I don't knows coming through. And the other thing we've seen in the sector is conflagration of swim lanes. So I work very closely with the Royal National Institute for the Blind and Thomas Pocklington Trust and Glaucoma UK and others. But what we're seeing is that previously we had very clearly defined swim lanes that we were guide dogs, we just did guide dogs. And Royal National Institute for the Blind, they did what's known as as ECLOs, which is the eye care liaison officers who work in hospitals supporting people who are experiencing sight loss for the first time. But actually, as our own missions have evolved and changed, and we've both started doing campaigning work, we start seeing crossover or swim lanes, which then can sometimes create territorial behaviours, which we've seen within our own sector, and I see it within other charitable sectors. And we need to be very careful to make sure that we don't get territorial, and we need to continually remind ourselves, who is it we are here to serve? And when you look at your own organisations, I would urge you to think about what's that question. Who are we serving? Are we serving the public or the clients or the person who's going to benefit from these services? Or are we an organisation that just, the computer says no, because we're actually more interested in our own outcomes for our own organisations as opposed to the outcomes of the people that we're here to serve. And that's one of the languages that I've been introducing to guide dogs since I got here, is making sure that we're very clear about who we are serving, because we're not here to serve ourselves as a charity. The ultimate goal of a charity should actually be to not exist. Now, it's not within Guide Dog's gift to actually cure blindness, much as I would love to wave my magic CEO wand, which we all get issues with. I won't be able to do that. But actually, we need to think about how all the different swim lanes for all the different organisations that are playing within our play space, how we can actually better work together so that we don't start crossing over and getting in each other's way as we're trying to swim towards whatever goal it is we have. So on to commercial versus charity. And one of the things that was very clear coming into the charity world from that private equity land that I was in before is that commerciality is changing. The charity sector is having to realise, and I imagine the local authority sector is as well, that having to be much more commercial in the way that you execute your day-to-day operations. That bottomless pit of money that we'd all hoped for in the past is very rapidly disappearing. the challenges that we all have with funding, whether it be from council tax and central government funding, or whether it be from me going out and asking people to donate money. People want to know that their money is being spent wisely and well. So myself as a charity CEO, one of the things that I was struck very early on in my career, I think 2 weeks in, I was over in Bristol, and I happened to be talking to a director of transformation. She was with me, and suddenly the reception team came in and started telling me about a story of a chap who came in to tell us about his brother who lived next door, who was going to leave us one of his houses when he passed, and he was dying of cancer. So it's quite a strange story. So we went outside to try and find this chap, and he just disappeared like will o' the wisp. But there was a car parked by the side of the road in an odd space. We thought, well, hang around, maybe it's him. And sure enough, this chap came out and gave us the full story. Actually, yes, his brother was dying of cancer, and where he couldn't get out, the only joy he got from his days was sat in his balcony watching the guide dogs being trained in the streets around his home. And he was so grateful for the joy that that brought him in these closing days that he was going to leave us a gift when he passed. Then I found out, and sorry, a tear alert here. He was actually his brother was there to take this chap to, his name was Ian. He was going to take Ian to palliative care that afternoon. So we dashed inside, got ourselves a couple of guide dogs, and gave him a guard of honour from his door to his car, which was going to be his last outside journey. But what it taught me was speaking to Ian for about 15, 20 minutes when he just sat in the car and petting one of our dogs, was that every single pound that I get given as a charity has got a story behind it. In the same way that every single pound that you get from council tax has got a story behind it. There are people out there who are making decisions and want to know that the money they donate or the money that they are taxed upon, that it is being spent wisely and well. So I have now what I call my Ian test, that when I'm spending money for the charity, could I look Ian in the face? He passed just before Christmas. Could I look him in the face and say that I've spent your legacy that you've given me wisely and well? And whoever funds your organisation, whether it's the public or a commercial enterprise, you need to be very clear in your heart that you are spending that wisely and well in a world where that competitiveness and commerciality will define whether your organisation can succeed in the future. We're also seeing very much a convergence of charity law with company law and also with governance. So we have the same pressing need around health and safety executive and all the GDPR and all the other bits of legislation that we would see in a normal commercial land, we are seeing in charity as well. We also have various charity commission pieces that come over the top of us. So this weekend, you may have seen in the Times an investigation into Great Ormond Street Hospital and the methods that some of the third-party fundraisers that they have are using to get money out of people, and some of the tactics they use, which are not in line with fundraising commission's code of conduct. And actually, the bar is being held ever higher in our regulatory spaces, in our governance spaces. And so we need to be able to embrace that and understand that governance world we live in, but also the fact many of us are public-facing organisations, and we are only one incident, one employee away from what I would call our moment on the front of the Daily Mail. So for me, it's the idea that one of my perhaps I know a guide dog instructor was dragging a dog along the road, and that's a picture was taken of that. I'd hope it would never happen. We have practiced and checks and balances to hope that it would never happen, but it could. For those in local authorities, it could be someone that you've commissioned to provide a service abuses their position of trust, and all of a sudden you find yourself on the Daily Mail. That sensationalism that we see out in that environment, in that public arena, we see it being played out every day on X, on Facebook and other places as well. We need to be very, very careful that our governance is very secure, so that when it does happen, and it's a when, not an if, we can make sure that we can evidence our organisation has done everything that is practically possible to prevent harm to those that we're actually here to support. Competition for the donor pound. Also, I mentioned earlier, but it really does mirror the product competition you would see within a commercial space. So what I'm really saying is, what I'm seeing in the commercial land that I come from is what I'm seeing the charity world is moving towards. I've been speaking to several of my fellow CEOs, and they're seeing the same thing, that they're having to behave more and more as if they were in a business environment than a charity environment with lots of altruistic gains. So I'm having to make some big bets for the future. And the big bets are not ones around financials, but actually around my people. I'm having to identify now those who are within my organization at all levels who I'm going to invest in for the future. Because as we're looking to be well led as an organization, the same way the CQC in my previous world regulated healthcare, we do need to identify the talent that's coming up below us. Because if we go back to one of the challenges I had on the previous slide, it was that of retaining our staff, that the staff churn that we see. So we need to start looking after the talent that we're going to need for the future, because as the world becomes more competitive, you are going to lose them to those around you. So you need to make some big bets on the people that you're going to have for the future and invest heavily in their future and make them want to stay with you as an organisation. Because the cultural change that we're going through, they will be easily attracted by better paychecks elsewhere, or other incentives that give them. Whereas actually, if you're investing in them as a person to help them learn and grow, that's a wonderful thing. And actually, they're the ones that are going to stay with the organisation 15, 20 years. I've just handed out a 50-year service award because that person has felt that we had invested in them all the way along their journey. So make some big bets amongst your teams and make sure that they understand that you're here to support them. I'm a big believer in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with that idea at the bottom that people know what their job is, they have the tools and equipment to do their job, and they've got a manager who supports them in what they're doing. But you also need to make sure you understand the difference between management and leadership. And at some point, you need to help your teams transition from being managers to being leaders. Some of the pieces that I've seen is, from my own experience when I was at Stryker, I remember being taken aside by my manager at that time. We just had a staff survey done, and we feedback with each of the teams what the themes were for that team. And I sat in that room, very much sat in the employee camp, and my manager took me to one side afterwards and said, "You're now in a management position, and you need to start assuming a leadership position. You can't be one of the team. You actually have to, at some points, represent the needs of the organisation, which may be in contravention with what your team need, but you need to be able to lead them on that change journey and help them to understand why we need to do what's right for the organisation, not necessarily what they want in their own individual circumstances." So at some point, your managers need to understand that they are part of a larger organisation and not just one of the team that they're representing. So helping people to make that transition to leadership, it's something I've tried to make a big bet on in the organisation. So just moving on to future thoughts. So I've kind of got 7 minutes before I was going to try and leave you with 10 minutes for any questions and answers and things like that. The big one that's out there, artificial intelligence and machine language is my first future thought. And I'm reading a book at the moment called The Future of Us. I can't remember the name of it. I think it's Ant Marsh, I think is the name of the author, but don't hold me on that one. It's called The Future of Us, and it's exploring, should we really be scared of AI? Are we all going to suddenly find ourselves surrounded by Arnold Schwarzenegger-like Terminators and the world closing to a crashing end? And the view that he's coming across is actually AI will not replace humans. A human using AI will learn to do roles more efficiently and better than you've ever seen before. Let me give an example of that. So I was talking with a marketing company of all things last week, and they have an AI engine that they use. And they've been recently helping a large insurer who I won't name. But what it does, the AI engine, they programmed it so that it sucks in all of the invoice information from all the private insurance, healthcare insurance claims, and it sorts out through an algorithm which ones are the spurious claims, something that would have taken an individual probably days or weeks to sift through several thousand claims. The AI can do in a matter of minutes because it has all these fancy algorithms. We then went on to discuss actually how we in guide dogs could use it to look at the £7 million a year we spend on vets, and actually being able to sift through the vets that are charging us for things like vaccinations, which as a working dog provider we should get free according to the guidelines they have, and actually how we can recover some of the money that we're spending. But we then looked at how AI could also be used in some of our other areas. So one of the things we worry about in guide dogs is the obesity of dogs. We want to make sure our dogs stay healthy and well and as fit to support those who are here to serve for as long as possible, the guide dog owners. So actually, if you tied it into the food ordering that the guide dog owner was doing, and you were able to look into our guide dog system and say, what's the ideal weight for that dog? The AI system will be able to calculate how much food the dog should be consuming on a daily basis, and therefore how long a bag of food should last. and therefore it start indicating, based on the order patterns of the owner, which dogs might be susceptible to being overfed because they'll be able to see they're consuming the food at a faster rate. Again, when you've got a population of up to 7,000 guide dogs retired, puppies and actually active guide dogs, it would take a team of people to do that on a monthly basis to look at which dogs might be susceptible to health issues. And actually using AI to simplify some of the tasks we have, it shouldn't be something we should be scared of. We should be starting to think about, instead of using ChatGPT on the side of your desk, how can you actually bring an AI tool into your workplace and get it to do some of your thinking for you, and start and release yourself as the human to actually do some of the more exciting things. Interestingly, I just for a giggle, I typed into ChatGPT, give me 5 fundraising ideas for guide dogs, and it went away and found 5 ideas for me for guide dogs. And you just ask it some of these simple questions. And by the way, they were all quite good ideas. They went off to looked at the internet and found out what lots of other charities were doing, and came back with some guide dog themed fundraising ideas. But actually within your own world, you should be thinking about, actually, what are the questions that I'd like an answer to? Chuck it into ChatGPT and it comes back. You have to understand the limitations of these engines. For instance, I think ChatGPT was, the latest version was completed, I think it was 2019. So if you're asking it for information that was after 2019, the chances are it's going to make it up as it goes along. For ourselves, as we're actually, again, looking at the people we're here to serve, one of the things when I came into guide dogs is I said, I need to be able to teach the organisation adaptability, because I don't know what's going to happen next week, or let alone next year or the year after. So I need to be able to teach adaptability. And as we look at the dog, the human, and the technology that we've got out there, we need to be looking all the time about how can we use technology to help that partnership be the very, very best it can be, to enhance it, not to replace it, but to enhance it. So I'm not about to start issuing robot guide dogs at any point soon, I promise you of that. But actually combining the dog with some technology, so that you're not limited by the 3 or 4 routes that you've trained the dog on, but actually the technology can help enhance what you do, so you can go anywhere without any restrictions. So we need to think about how tech can actually help us in our human endeavours, both AI and also using the tech that is in just one of these mobile phones that we all have in our pockets. And then we need to think about adaptive strategies. Typically, people have 5-year plans. I know we did at Guide Dogs, and one of the things we've sat down and said, actually, the world is evolving so quickly. Previously, humans designed computer chips, but now AI and, well, computer chips are designing computer chips. The rate of change and growth within our technology market is going to be so rapid, we will barely be able to keep up. So actually, to have a fixed 5-year strategy probably isn't what you want to do anymore. You probably want to be looking very much more about, what is our long-term goal? What is the thing that we say that we as an organisation over 10 or 15 years will be successful in achieving? And then have a look at having an adaptive strategy where you tack and jive your way to that ambition, that North Star, as it were. So we're kind of looking at these things that we've taken from a commercial world. These sorts of things have been going on for a while, but actually bringing those into the modern charity environment has been quite an interesting one. So am I loving the job I have? Absolutely. I have enormous challenges within our sector, whether it be from fundraising or from cultural differences, as people who are spend between 13 and 50 years within a role. Their ability to adapt and change is very, very difficult. So actually encouraging people to learn and grow and to accept change is quite a different thing. So one of the statements I made just now is we need to be able to teach adaptability. So if you think about yourself and how adaptable you are, one of the interesting questions I've started asking my managers is, many of them manage someone with a visual impairment, and they are fully sighted themselves. And I've heard stories from some of my visual impairment colleagues that in some areas that we can be a little paternalistic as an organisation. And I'm looking to make sure that we get rid of that as a culture, because that's not acceptable. But I asked my managers, how would you feel if you were managed by someone with a visual impairment on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being, I couldn't understand how I could do it, to 10 being, I don't understand what the problem is. And actually trying to get the organisation to accept that 10. It doesn't matter who manages me, whether they be neurodiverse, visually impaired, disabled, or able in all ways, neurotypical, as it were. Trying to get an organisation to have a culture that really embraces adaptation and change is one of my challenges I have over the coming years. So it's not something that I'm taking on board lightly, but when we're looking at these strategies, we also need to think about the human capital we have, and using our old biases and prejudice, we need to set them to one side. I think the public sector is a long way ahead of the private sector in this. And I know Guide Dogs, even though we're a disability charity, we've got a lot of lessons to learn from yourselves from the local government environment. So I'm looking forward to that journey as well. So it's going to be an interesting one. I'm going to pause there. No pun intended with Guide Dogs, although everything we do has to have a doggy theme. So I'm just going to stop there and take down the presentation and just open up the floor in my final 10 minutes, which I planned brilliantly. Final 10 minutes, just take any random questions or thoughts that you might have before I hand back to Kate.
Thank you, Andrew. And yeah, please use the hand raised button and Andrew will field you himself if you want to just unmute to throw a question at him.
Stunned silence. It's what
it is a bit. Well, I've got plenty of questions if people would like me to continue. Well, I mean, I was really pleased with your last point about the do with, not to, the communities you're seeking to serve. And obviously with us in public services, that's, as you rightly point out, something we're trying to be better at all the time. And increasingly, I think with the sort of asset-based notion of which is something we teach in LGE, the concept of, recognizing what your assets are and that your people are your assets, is a direction we've been traveling in. And I suppose my first question to you is how? How do you try to flip that paternalism on its head? Not just finding out what the mood is, but how do you sort of embed that shift?
Yeah, I guess one of the issues we've always had is how do you create that safe environment? And I guess it comes down to demonstrable leadership in a specific space to actually able to convince the people you're working with that it is genuinely safe for you to be able to ask those questions that you just don't know the answer to. So within Guide Dogs, we've set up forums for managers called It's Okay to Ask, named after the TV program by the same name, which was set up around disabilities around the 2012 Olympics, as I recall. But first of all, creating a safe space so that managers feel that they can ask the questions that they're uncertain about, whether it be about any aspect of diversity. We've also set up lots of forums or engagement groups where we have our very, very successful Proud at Guide Dogs group. We have prayer groups, we have men's health groups, women's health groups, we have kin groups for our international communities, and we have disability groups, we have visual impairment groups, as you would expect. We have lots of areas where people can actually go along and either be allied to it or active members of that, to create those safe spaces where people feel they can have the conversations. So there's lots of points in my mind about, in order to build a culture where you can have that full embracement of the diversity that is our world, you have to create safe spaces. And part of it starts with your leadership. And are they really, really open to having a safe environment? Are they really willing to actually listen to the hard feedback about the way that they're behaving and doing things? Are they really willing to embrace the difficult questions and not be counter? And actually, are they walking the walk, or are they just giving it lip service? It's a difficult one. It's one I challenge myself on every day. I took the job with Eden Futures because it was mental health and learning disabilities, an area which I felt very uncomfortable in. But I knew I had to challenge myself, and I took that. And I tried to continually challenge myself. I don't get it right every day. And actually, as a leader, you have to be prepared to stand up and say, I'm not going to get it right every time. Please help me as I'm on my own journey. But most leaders find it very hard to be vulnerable. They like to wear the mask. They like to wear that mask.
So I think, given the different types of cultures within which you've worked, I'm really interested to hear you sort of just compare what is easy or hard about attempting to embed change culturally. But I think, have we just had a question pop in? I heard something buzz.
Claire's popped her hand up, so I'll
there we go. Go for it.
And then we'll go to Claire. So as I look back over my career, I go to the noughties with my time at Striker. That was what I would call a rugby club culture. Lots of what happens on tour stays on tour, a really unhealthy culture, but yet it was a very successful culture commercially. It had a mantra of 20% forever, i.e. whatever you did last year, your sales target was going to be 20% higher the next year. and they encourage that kind of rugby club mentality of competition, and I found that a very alien concept. And so whenever we went away on a conference, 4 or 5 of us who are like-minded would move away from that group, let them go off and do their thing and be the rugby club on tour, and actually go and find out about the local culture, go and eat in the local restaurants, and go on a voyage of discovery. So that was a really unhealthy culture. But then as I moved through my career and I got to Eden Futures, so that was in, mid-teens, the culture there was very much one about how do we serve the community we're here to support? How do we remove barriers? So within supported living, those of you who are familiar with it, the idea is actually how do you enable someone to live in the least invasive, for want of a better phrase, the least restrictive manner? How do you provide care in the least restrictive manner so that a person can live the life that they're choosing to live, as opposed to the one that you are paternalistically trying to put upon people? And that was a real eye-opener for me, because I was expecting that paternalistic piece. As I move in now into the visual impairment charity, I do see, and I hear feedback from my VI colleagues, that the world can be very paternalistic. Just because you can't see doesn't mean you can't think. But people will make these assumptions about you, as opposed to actually spending the time to talk to people. It's one of the ambitions I have, is to help release that. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but certainly give some examples of some poor cultures. Yeah. Claire, I think I saw your hand up and then you disappeared.
I just popped something in the chat. So when you were talking about sort of manager support groups, I think that's sort of something that really resonates probably with a number of people in our team. We've got a number of neurodiverse employees with a range of conditions, I guess. And for some of those people who are managers, they've not ever had this experience before. And it's really, really hard, because when something goes wrong, there appears to be very little support anywhere. And you feel like it's really challenging, and you're actually trying to sort of battle that on your own. So if you actually had a group, I guess, where there were managers that had similar experiences, at least you could ask the questions, couldn't you? Has anyone experienced this before? How did you deal with this? What did you find with this? And I guess there's something about training and stuff in that space too.
Yeah, I must admit, one of the pieces that we've done at Guide Dogs is put in a dedicated DEI team who are creating those safe spaces for people. I do find it absolutely fascinating that what if this happened before my time, but initially the reaction for a lot of people was, oh, it's just political correctness, here we go again. But actually, when they saw the value that these teams bring and the ability that you have these safe space conversations, and not feel as embarrassed as you might have done by voicing an opinion which might be different to others, and actually then having a reasoned debate and understanding and seeing your viewpoint move and change, you really got to see the benefit of having these teams creating those spaces. Whereas before it was just, oh, just here we go. It's like health and safety gone mad. Now it's DEI. What's it going to be next week? And actually, lived experience is such a powerful thing to have within your workspace, and getting that understanding and the impact that you might be having on others unknowingly. But
I guess
has to be go on.
Yeah, I guess that's why we do it to an extent, because in my team we're looking after services for adults with disabilities, etc. So we're trying to sort of like embrace that culture, but that goes wrong when something goes wrong in terms of managing the employee, because the support that surrounds that is just lacking, basically.
One of the things that worries me in these spaces is when it does go wrong. If someone's tried to do something with the best of intentions but manages to completely cock it up in terms of their delivery or whatever it is, there has to be forgiveness on both sides. And if the person's intent was not malicious, they just did something clumsily, we need to, that seems to be a bit of a grey area sometimes, that people can be very quick to be offended, and trying to make sure that that balance is there. The DEI team do help with that mediation piece. I find is very helpful. Any other? I'm just going to check the chat to see if I've missed anything. That'd be a good thing to do with ESO. Oh, that's yourself, Claire. Rod Cullen, I agree. I think it's about creating a culture of continual improvement from the top down. Yeah, we're all looking inwards and learn to challenge ourselves. We will feel more comfortable being challenged by others. It'd be a great skill for leaders. Someone's just had to leave, and yes, a couple of people have to leave. And Stephen, thank you very much for your personal comment. any other questions? We're 1 minute to. Any final
Indeed.
thoughts from anyone?
Well, if I may, and slightly abusing my host status, I just wanted to reflect back to those listening to the recording and to those who are still here with us, that I've been very fortunate in my position as a non-exec with Guide Dogs, but as very much an operational deliverer at Essex and elsewhere in the broader Greater Essex system, that I've had the opportunity to learn from leaders around me, alongside, above, and sometimes those who are definitely leading, but from more junior roles. And I do cross-fertilise as much as I can, which is exactly why you're here, Andrew. And to that end, I've been working with some of those DEI leads within Guide Dogs to help as a trustee what's going there, and also bringing some of the insight and learning from Guide Dogs into the Essex system. And we do at the moment, actually, to answer your question, Claire, to some extent, there is a new ND employee resource space just being sort of scoped to help to get some of that messaging out, because not everybody who has a neurodiversity identifies with it as a disability, so the language is something to vary. And I'm certainly aware of neurodiverse senior folk who don't necessarily talk about it as openly as perhaps they could, to help with that general cultural shift about everybody's business is everybody else's business, potentially, if we want it to be. And the lived experience piece is, as you say, Andrew, so important that we hear from people who, like me and you, identify with our own needs as well as our own leadership roles, and our own spaces where we can openly say we've got some experience of what we're trying to deliver here, and we want to do with and beside, not to. And so, even talking about the whole visually impaired manager question, I've got 2 employees here that I line manage as a visually impaired person, and there have been people here who've line managed me. I think they may have already had to leave, but that visual impairment in the workplace piece is very much something we experience here at Essex, along with all the other different needs and variations. And thank you so much for your time. As mentioned to others, we have recorded today and we'll be sharing it and emailing it out. So a lot more people hopefully will catch up who couldn't join us in this specific time slot. The next one is indeed Lord Victor Adebowale, who will be coming along, but in the breakfast slot. So we'll see, Andrew, whether that's more or less popular time-wise. I think ultimately lunch, we are still experimenting. Lunch times might be best for people, but the idea was that this was something to help sort of stretch and challenge in the margins of one's day, as a learning space. So thank you very much for your time. We'll happily share the recording with you, Andrew, should you wish to share it with any of your counterparts. And I will see you in dog business in the future.
You shall indeed.
Thank you very
everyone,
much.
for your time.
Thanks,
Bye now.
everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, so Fawn, we can probably turn the recording off.